So we're going to bring our day to a close by meeting three fabulous individuals who I am sure you all know. These are great artists. One of them is a painter, one is a actor, and one is a comedian, a personality. And the puzzle I put to them was come and talk to us about the life of the artist as the artist ages. Most of us in life work in certain kinds of structures which are also there to help us as time wears on. The thing about the artist is he lives entirely by his wits, and when those wits give out, I think the income probably stops. So it'll be particularly interesting to hear from them. I'm not going to introduce them individually. I'm going to talk about them now. Charlie Pachter is up first. He's a great creator of Canadian icons. You'll recognize his imagery even if you don't as yet know his name, but you certainly will. Eric Peterson, of course, will always be Billy Bishop, but is also famous for portraying many other roles, including contemporaneously these days on television. And of course, Don Herron will always be Charlie Farquharson. So let's let's begin with Charlie Pachter, famous creator of The Queen on the Moose. Charlie?
Just stop me if I go too long.
I will.
Okay. Well, it's a real treat to be here. This is going to be a challenge for me because we're going to do a roller coaster ride through a lifetime here in 17 minutes. But the beauty of it is having imagery. At age 4, I pet a moose at the CNE on a movie made by the National Film Board called Johnny at the Fair. I was Johnny. You can see it on YouTube. It's one of the funniest movies ever made. And in the movie, I shook hands with Mackenzie King. I got kissed by Barbara Ann Scott. And flash forward to June of this year, I got kissed by Tessa Virtue. Okay? Moving straight ahead. Vaughan Road Collegiate, 1959, Toronto. That's Miss Hudgens in the middle. She gave me D- in art. 10 years ago, when I got an Order of Canada, the phone rang, and there's this squeaky little voice saying, "Hello, dear, you know who this is?" I knew right away. She says, "I always knew you had it in you." Right? That was Miss Hudgens. I grew up in prissy middle-class Toronto in the 50s. By the time I was 16, I knew I had to get out. At 17, in my third year at U of T, I ran off to France. I had a music teacher, Miss Cavallo, who said to me, "Darling, if you're going to be an artist, you must learn the French language. You must go to France." So I went to France, and I studied at the Sorbonne, and I started doing watercolors and working in the ateliers of Paris in the 60s. It was spectacular. I went to summer camp, and who did I meet? Margaret Atwood. She was the nature girl. We called her Peggy Nature. I was Charlie A&C. I fell in love with her spirit and her soul. She became my muse, and I spent 5 years illustrating her poetry. I did my master's degree at the Cranbrook Academy of Art in Michigan, illustrating her brilliant works that she sent to me. She was like my muse. We became steadfast friends. P.S. She's not the woman today that I once knew when I was 18 years old, but we have maintained a steadfast friendship. Here she is at 20 trying to make sense of life. Through the wilderness of the flesh, across the mind's ice expanses, we hunt each other. I keep being afraid I will find you dead in the snow. When will you be found? This is Atwood at age 25, okay? I started printmaking, came back to Toronto, opened a shop on Shaw Street in 1965. This was during my fucked up period, I call it. I was trying to figure myself out. How come a middle-class boy from Toronto ended up being an artist? When I was 10, my mother said to me, as I was painting on the floor in the bedroom in the middle of summer, "You should be out playing with the other kids. You want to paint? Paint the bridge chairs. Do something useful." This is a portrait of Atwood in 1968 called "It Was Fascination, I Know." She's holding a caterpillar and turning into a butterfly. I lucked out. After Johnny at the Fair in 1947, I said, nothing will keep me away from Expo. I had to have a job, and I went to work at Expo 67. That Giacometti, which we placed beside the American Pavilion, sold last year at Sotheby's for $135 million. Okay? Let's not get into what it's like to be a Canadian artist. Let's not compare. Okay. But at Expo, I lucked out. I met a spectacular creative Zoomer named Alexander Calder, one of the great American sculptors. I was 25, he was 75. Believe it or not, that's him and me sitting at the base of that brilliant Inco stabile. Do any of you remember Expo? Yes, okay. And that's me and Alexander Calder. I managed to get one shot. I used to take him his beer and sandwiches. I moved out to Calgary in 1969 and discovered Canada. It was spectacular. I drove out alone in a mini minor across this spectacular country, and it only dawned on this little kid from Toronto how huge and incomprehensible this country is. For all the internet and for all the stuff, you have to do it at least once. You have to drive across or take the train across. And it was in Calgary that I discovered all the pop art symbols of the 60s and 70s. Every Canadian art magazine was full of stuff about Warhol and Lichtenstein, and everybody, if you came from here, it was deemed to be inconsequential. I couldn't understand the colonial mentality, how our teachers put us down if we tried to lift up things that were Canadian, to be on a level playing field with the rest of the world. And I've been struggling with this through my career, but I've emerged victorious. We'll tell you more later. There's Atwood in 1970 at my show in the Canadian Art Galleries in Calgary. I was Elton John and she was Joan Crawford. There we were. We went to the Sally Ann in Calgary, $1.50 for each item. Thank you. Next. Came back to Toronto in 1972. It was the middle of the pop art period, and I discovered the Red Rocket and did a huge series of works on the Toronto streetcar. Had my first show at Isaac's Gallery. This, typical Toronto, the title of it was Streetcar Erection. The Star called it Streetcar Extension. Okay, it's now in the mayor's office, by the way. These are all images from that period. There's Av Isaacs in 1971. And I woke up in the middle of the night after having been in the Arctic, where Av sent me up to work with the Inuit in 1971, and I got very ill. I got back recuperated in a hospital in Toronto from pneumonia. I went to see an eclipse of the sun in the Gas Bay in the summer of 1972. And I heard on the radio that the Queen was coming to Niagara-on-the-Lake to open the new Shaw Festival Theatre. And I'd always been bemused and bewildered by the expression monarch. I come from a fourth group of Canadians. The first three were First Nations, French, and English. The fourth group I made up an acronym for. Peeved. Practically everybody else vaguely ethnically defined. And I couldn't understand where this kind of WASP mindset about Canada being so prim and this absolute reverence for the monarchy in the 60s and the 70s. 275 years after Wolfe beat Montcalm on the Plains of Abraham, Charles and Camilla came across Canada last November, and we paid $4 million to let them see the rest of the country. That's a whole other story. I got confused by the term monarch. In school, the moose was the monarch of the North. I had pet a moose at age 4. I worked in it with in my consciousness, and I decided to do this image. Well, it caused a scandal. When the painting came out in 1973, my dealer refused to show it. So I had to, these are all other images from the series, which all should be, by the way, in the National Gallery and are not. That's called Procession Through Landscape, and the other one, which is owned by Jim Coots, is called the Curtsy Triptych. They're all about colonialism, and they're all about the fact that we have this fabulous country where our head of state doesn't live here. Hello? What's going on? Where is our self-esteem? And by the way, I think she's terrific. We grew up with her, but do you want to see Harry or William on our money? It's another country. We have to have a passport to go there. It's not the same. Things change. These are all images now. That one's in the U of T library, the art center. So I lived on Shaw Street. The dealer refused to show the work, so in the 70s, I did a happening called the Other Shaw Festival. And I opened the show the same day the Queen opened hers in Niagara-on-the-Lake. And a friend of mine, there's the late, great Greg Curnow, who was a dear friend and a wonderful artist. These paintings, Royal Family on the Rocks, they were all investigating the Canadian psyche, trying to figure out what is it about our country that makes us all these hundreds of years later still pay homage to this anachronism, which is so interesting at one level, but we haven't been able to find our own version of it. Joyride. There she is on a supermarket moose. By the way, I gave her one for her 80th birthday, and I got a great letter back from the palace, as only the British can, saying, Her Majesty wishes to thank you for your thoughtful gift and assures you that an appropriate place will be found for it. Okay. More of these images. P.S. None of them are in any public museums or galleries in Canada, but they're all owned by major collectors, okay? So that what happens, they wait for you to die, they get a fabulous tax receipt. In the meantime, you just keep struggling along. Okay, this is the most recent one called The Laughing Monarchs, based on a Franz Hals painting in the AGO called The Laughing Cavalier. There she is. By the way, I had that painting in Whistler in February. I had a show out there, and the Queen of Norway came into the gallery, and she cracked up when she saw that. And I said, do you know her? She said, do I know her? We are cousins. They're all related, okay? In 1974, I bought this old building on Ryerson Avenue next to Theatre Passe Muraille for $90,000. Hello? Okay, Margaret Atwood loaned me $10,000. I called it Artists Alliance because United Artists was already taken, and we started doing shows there. That was my loft, 3,000 square feet. Can you believe this? And look, Joyce Wieland and Margaret Lawrence came to make a film of The Diviners, and I was one of the producers. Of course, it just got watered down until Hollywood got hold of it, and it was completely unrecognizable, but that's quite the photograph. But I did a painting of Margaret Lawrence sitting with Joyce's shadow thereafter, okay? The moose, he kept going. In this particular painting, I took the queen off. She'd been sitting on his back, and this is now called The Monarch of the North emerging from the loins of the sleeping giant. This is now in University College's collection. And there's Barbara Ann Scott with the moose after all those years, and there's a Canadian Tire coming over the hill. You see, it's called Look Out, Barbara Ann. For those of you who don't know, this is pop art symbolism, okay? There's Moose Plunge in a group of 7 landscape. We're always making fun of the establishment art press who were putting us down for being entrepreneurial. That was not the way artists were supposed to be. We're supposed to be inept neurotics who have curators to look after us and save us from ourselves. So that was a show where, called The Ugly Show. On the top we're normal, on the bottom we're wearing chocolate wrappers on our teeth. That got front page headlines in the Globe and Mail at the time. There were some ugly images that were put in the show. On the top left, that's Margaret Atwood's egg cup that blew up in her ceramics class. The black velvet painting of the City Hall was from my dad. There you go. And those are my rejection letters from the Canada Council, all 10, which are now in the library in the University of Toronto. And I remember telling my mom that I got a $300 tax deduction for my rejection letters. She said, you see, it wasn't a total loss. I bought a farm up near in Oro-Medonte, an hour and 10 minutes from the city, to escape the hot lofts of the city. I tell everybody to come on up for drinks by the pool. There's the pool. From Canadian Tire. I had summer shows there. That painting, 6 Figures in a Landscape, which the esteemed collector, Mr. Znaimer, owns, that's Moses on the left talking with Taller Cranston, Marcy Lippmann on one side. It was a whole series of paintings based on Emile Bernard and the French Impressionists of that period. In those years, you couldn't make a living as an artist. It was impossible. To make $15,000 or $20,000 a year from your work was tough. What did I do? I had transformative vision. I bought and renovated old buildings on Queen Street. That was at number 367 Queen. I bought the building for $80,000. I had a show in there. The building is now for sale for $4.1 million, okay? How life goes on. This was an old blacksmith shop and grocery store from the 1870s, fixed that up, moved in there in the 70s, and had all kinds of, before and after. The real estate agent, the guy didn't want to sell it, he was Ukrainian. The little Jewish real estate lady says, put in the offer, must include the drapes. And that's how I got it. But I took the drapes down, okay. We had parties, the summer solstice parties, where hundreds and hundreds of people would show up. My favorite obsession is the cute little wasp party sandwiches with the crust cut off. So I would order them all, and my mother would be a sergeant in front of all the starving artists who would line up and wolf them down like pills, and my mother would go, You had 7. Tomorrow's another day. This is not the Scott mission. And we had jugglers and this is all in a lane behind the AGO. It all started because of the summit at the AGO, where we couldn't even get into our own neighborhood. And I called the party Summit Up. And that's how that happened. There's Michael Snow, 1977. Gershon Iskowitz. All of these people, my dear friends, now gone. I took Polaroids of all of them in the 70s. Joyce Whelan, John Hirsch, Lynn Donahue, Bruno Gerussi, June Callwood, Roloff Benny. And I've done a whole series now that hopefully will go into the right now non-existent Portrait Gallery of Canada. These are all Polaroids that have been preserved, and there are over 300 of them. Old dump on Queen Street, 1979, turned it around and turned it into a very elegant restaurant called Gracie's. This is how it looked when I convinced all the neighbors to do the Chateau of the Loire renovating. It was an affectionate satire about everything Canadian and from Toronto. We had a Scarborough room, a Mississauga room, a Rosedale room, and a Forest Hill room. It was way ahead of its time. There's Atwood, Peter Newman. There's the Scarborough and the Mississauga rooms, Harvest Gold with Shag Broadlam, Avocado Green. And in the Scarborough room, we served shepherd's pie, Jell-O mold, Rice Krispie squares, chocolate milk. The mayor of Scarborough was furious. He sent us a letter telling us we should be slapped, and we hung the letter up in the Scarborough room. You could change the signs. People would phone up and say, "Do you have a Downsview room?" You say, "Just a moment," turn the sign around. In the middle of all this, Atwood had sent me her magnificent masterpiece, The Journals of Susanna Moodie. It took me 9 months, from February till October. I brought printers in from Spain, and we printed her book, which has become, he said modestly, the best-known collaboration between a Canadian poet and a Canadian artist. We finally printed a small reprint of it in 1997. It sold out, and it's going to be reprinted again this year. In a longer lecture, I would read the poem to you. It's quite stunning, but we have to move on. There's my painting of Susanna Moodie. Janet Amos posed for me, as little realizing I was going to turn her into Susanna Moodie. That's now in a collection in New York City. Thank you very much. Painting away, there's my portrait of Atwood. I did it in 1980. A good friend insisted on buying it for $2,500. She has just sold it to the Portrait Gallery in Ottawa for $75,000. What did I get? Zip. But maybe I'll get a free meal out of it, we'll see. I ran off to Japan after losing everything on Queen Street in the 80s. The interest rates went to 25%. I was 39 years old. All 14 properties taken away by the bank. I lost everything. My friends thought I was going to kill myself. The kids don't know what a recession is. 25% interest we were paying, okay? So I ran off to Japan, discovered their traditions, came home and did the Supremes. That's our Supreme Court. I just redid them. Beverly McLaughlin asked me if she could have the new version on her Christmas card. There they are. This is called the Rosedale Kiss. This is in a private collection in Toronto. It's the Wasps air kissing. John Lounsbury, Jane Aiken, and Walter Bowen watching. It's a little bit of the mores of the Toronto sort of elite, the ones who tried to vote for George Smitherman and it didn't work. There's Prince Charles with the moose, the once and future king. I gave him a copy of this, and he cracked up. It was on the front page of the Globe and Mail. There it is. And then I gave him the one of his mother, and he said, "Do you have copies for Harry and William? I'd love them to see Granny on a moose." So I sent him a copy, and there you go. Guess who? Who's that handsome man? 1979, 1980. And there's the portrait I did of Moses and Marilyn. I don't want to embarrass him, but I have to say, the Montrealers always supported us artists long before the others. More sophisticated, more understanding of what we were doing. Moses was one of my great inspirations because he was buying my work a long time before anybody else. And there was another Montrealer, you're going to see her in a minute. That's called Tour de Force. That was bought by Bluma Appel. You're going to see in a minute. That's now hanging in Davies Ward, Phillips, and Weinberg in Toronto. There's Bluma. Bluma was like a mother to me. She used to call me every week at 6 a.m. and I'd answer the phone groggily and she'd say, "What are you doing up so early?" Bluma and my mother died within a week of each other in 2007, and the CBC called me about Bluma, and I said I lost 2 mothers in 1 week. She was amazing. Now, to you Zoomers, you want to hear about a zesty Zoomer? This woman kept going until she was 90. Even when she became ill, she never shared it with a lot of people, but she never let up. She had dreams, she had goals. She founded the whole AIDS research thing in Toronto and for all of Canada. She was just amazing. Here we go, on the road again. The Moose's Revenge. This is called surrealism, okay? I got a phone call, a mysterious phone call from Mel Lastman's office when they did the Moose in the City, and everybody said, well, what about Pachter? Because Mel was north of St. Clair, he didn't know about who I was. Finally, I said, I will do it on one condition, that you let me put it on the archway. I'll do the inaugural Moose. Everybody at the city turned it down, all the cultural bureaucrats. Mel leans over at a meeting and he says to me, never mind, we'll call the engineering department, we'll put it up in the middle of the night. That's how it got there. It was on the front page of the New York Times travel section. Hello, let us hope Rob Ford is so inspired. We'll see. And then, of course, these were the funny moose in the Mel Moose project. There's the Mel Moose in the front with the hair plugs made out of door springs. The Maryland Moose with the stolen Angora sweater. The best one there at the bottom was the gay moose from Church and Wellesley. That was designed by experts, right? Okay, he was a huge hit. He ended up going to Niagara-on-the-Lake because Donald Zeraldo had sponsored it, and all the little old ladies went, Land of Goshen, what's that then, eh, Marge? Well, they repainted it. It's now brown with green grapes on it, okay? Okay, I'm up at my farm in Oro, 1979, 1980. I fall in love with the flag. I bought an old flag at Canadian Tire, stuck it in a fence post hole, and the rest is history. I started doing paintings of the flag, opened a huge show on Queen Street in 1981, 2 months before the recession started. The one on the left was bought by Joan Chalmers for the Canadian Music Centre, on the right by Jim Coots and Keith Davey for Prime Minister Trudeau. And I have a magnificent letter from Trudeau when he received the flag. These are some of the different ones. This one, which I did in 1983, is now in the collection at the McMichael. So there's hope. That was in a... This old junk building, the IGA on Queen Street, this entire building we bought for $340,000, turned it into the most glamorous gallery Toronto had ever seen. It lasted exactly 6 months, and then the banks came and took everything away. It was called the Painted Flag. It looked as mystical as a Ming tomb. It was one of the most glamorous, most elegant ways of showing the flag. I lucked out. After I lost everything, I got a mysterious phone call in the middle of the night, the Reichman brothers. They'd heard from friends that I'd gone bankrupt. They came, they said, okay, how much for all three? We did a deal. They've been there now since 1983. They're in the Stock Exchange Tower. And my mom, bless her heart, as only mothers can, she bumped into Mr. Reichman somewhere and she said, I just want to know something. Where's the plaque? A week later, there was a plaque. Okay. Whoops, what did I do there? I got the wrong thing here. I got to put that back on. Okay, here we go, and forward. This is at the Ontario Science Centre, show condemned by John Bentley Mays. He said, moreover, the couch art for the walls of patriotic dentists. That was the review, okay? You're going to see how he inspired me to make up my own art critic years later. These two gentlemen were on the original committee, more Zoomers, George F.G. Stanley, and a judge from Perth, Ontario, who were on the original committee that chose the flag. And they were thrilled to see what a Toronto artist had done with it. Heather and Jerry bought this for the Canadian Embassy in Washington. Okay? And these five, believe it or not, are outside Prime Minister Harper's office in the Parliament buildings. They were donated to the Canadiana Fund, and that's where they're hanging now. And Lorene Harper invited me over to see the painting in Sussex and served me butter tarts. I'm obsessed with butter tarts because they're uniquely Canadian. I did a painting called State of the Tarts on the left. There it is. Bought by the Bronfmans, okay? I said to Lorene, how did you know? She says, we have our spies. And there's Michaëlle Jean when I gave her one of her with the moose. Only the top ranks get to have their picture with the moose. So Michaëlle loved it. Look at Adrian in 1984. In 2001, I was approached after 9/11 when 5,000 Canadians went down to New York City, and we helped out the New York Fire Department, and that was called Side by Side. It was a huge hit. There's Chrétien and Giuliani. I'm going back and forth here. After the recession, I was broke. I had no money. I didn't know what to do. I got a mysterious phone call from Julian Porter. He said, "We don't like the idea that's been submitted for the mural in the TTC station on College. Would you redo it?" So I did the Leafs confronting the Canadiens, the great Canadian confrontation. There they are. My mom, who came to the opening, there she is at the lower left. She got off the subway and they stuck a mic in her face and said, "So what do you think of this?" And she looked at the camera and said, "Well, it's the basement, but it's permanent." See, she had a way with words, right? Oh, how am I doing? Okay, should I stop? I'm almost done. 2 minutes. Oh, okay, I got to rush through it. Okay, we'll save this. That was done for Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. There's the hockey stick. There it is at Maple Leaf Gardens. The group of 7. Oh, I could go on and on. This is very frustrating. These are my whole series of images based on historical moments in Canadian history. The Loyalists, the coming north. Oh, this is another lecture. There's my painting of John Graves Simcoe, another lecture. Hope to do it. I found that in New Jersey. Simcoe slaughtered 12 Americans in their bed. This is only because of Google and the internet. It's not in one Canadian history book that the founder of Toronto, war is hell, killed a bunch of innocent people, hello, in the middle of the American Revolution. I have to rush through all this. Every one of these is a lecture. This painting of Mrs. Simcoe, that's Dominique Blythe, who posed for me as the founding of Toronto, 1793. Their first house in the wilderness. There's Dominique and me with. This is the chapel of the Simcoes in England, a very fascinating place to be. Here I was painting the mural of the Queen with the moose. There's the Queen's cousin, Lady Pamela Fitzsimmons Fitzgibbons Fitzhughes, who said, who now said, "I declare this mural open," and fell over from. And 275 years later, there they are. She looks kind of moose-like. There we go. That was at my opening at Castle Hill. Do you remember that, 1990? And then I went off to France. It was the great moment of my life, a combination wedding and bar mitzvah and everything else. The French treat artists the way Canadians treat hockey players. They couldn't have been more full of excitement and passion. They called me le maître de l'exotisme canadien, the master of Canadian exoticism. I did J. Scott as Van Gogh in the Yellow Bed, me as Cézanne. One of my most famous paintings, Life is Not a Fountain. I don't have time to tell you the joke, but it was bought by a French collector in Cap d'Aille, where it is now. There's the French Minister of Culture who came to open the show. And there's a handsome young Moses again right there. Then it moved to Germany. Okay, I'm trying to go fast. Now, this was at the ROM in 1994. The Queen and Princess Di came to my book launch. Sure. There they are. I got depressed at age 50, for those of you who are into Zoomerdom, and I knew I was in the middle of my life. What do I do now? It was Prozac or Miami. I chose Miami. I bought a home down there, and I was there for 6 winters. Took the old backyard, painted it by hand. That's a fake pool. It's a trompe-l'oeil pool. People would not walk on it. Yeah, no maintenance. And then some of the Miami paintings, that's called a delicate balance. These are all Miami images. Then I came back to Toronto. I'd had 8 years in Miami. I found an old dump on Grange Avenue. What's more important for artists than a relationship, believe it or not, is space for your work. I'm proud and not embarrassed to say I've lived alone all my life. I've never felt I had to be in a relationship. I have dear, wonderful friends and family. And, you know, to come from Canada in the mid-20th century and be like that, just like Beethoven and Michelangelo, forgive me for dropping names. But, I mean, it's just the way it is. You know, you don't have to worry about a lot of things when you live on your own. This magnificent woman was Rosie Abella's mother. She was a Holocaust survivor real estate lady who argued with the Chinaman when I went to buy this place. She says, "Mr. Lee, this is junk. Feh. Puh." And she spit. The guy wanted $350 for the house when everything else on the street was $100. We went in $140 and I got it for $165. Okay, and then I turned it into the Moose Factory, and here I am as the fake art critic, Don Rouge Humber. He's based on John Bentley Mays. Don loves my work, and he says, "So stunning, words fail me, a legend in his own mind." You all know Don is from Three Rivers, get it? Okay. Okay, and again, there's Moses, the big collector. These are images of barns from up in my place in Aurelia. Look how quick I'm going here. I had a show in Tokyo. It was wonderful. In the mysterious East, Bay St. Paul, Quebec. Here's the moose at the corner of Harvard and St. George. And because there's the Queen came to visit it, sure. If you don't know how to do Photoshop, you just... yeah. This is in Grad House at U of T. There's Steve Teeple, a brilliant Canadian architect. I said, I got this empty parking lot in the middle of a shabby street beside the AGO. Can I build my dream home or not? I was 62 when I made the decision. The interest rates had gone down to 3%. I had to borrow $2 million to build this place, but it's become my chief joy and happiness, and I'm an unabashed entrepreneur who doesn't have a dealer, works with the public, and guess what? It gets better. I mean, there are more and more people who are coming to see my work now. It's kind of the Harry Rosen thing. Gee, he lives in this fancy house. His art must be valuable, you know. There's the loft on the top floor. There's my Chinese warrior that I bought long before the ROM had its show. There's the view from the roof in the heart of the city. We're almost there. This was Jim Balsley from RIM, who came. We did a dinner for CAMH. This is a bunch of blondes who came to visit me, who won me in a charity. Up on the roof. These schnorrer cheapskates came from Dayton, Ohio. They didn't so much as buy a postcard. Thank you very much. That sometimes happens, right? This you'll love. Robert Rauschenberg, New York, $6 million. My framer's son, $30. Okay? This is a whole other lecture about the international art world versus the Canadian art world. Can't do it now. We'll go into it. That was a joke, the previous one that's by Richard Prince that sold in New York for $3 million. This is my joke painting bought by Aislinn, the cartoonist. A goose goes into a drugstore to buy a condom. The druggist asks, "Shall I put that on your bill?" And the goose replies, "I'm not that kind of goose." Okay. Okay, I'm almost done, Moses. Okay. India. And my home up on Lake Simcoe, where I took an old ice house from the 1930s and turned it into my paradise. This is what being a zesty Zoomer is all about. It's joy. It's joy up there for 3 months of the year. This is what I live with when I'm up there. It was early Swiss, Bavarian, Tudor, Nazi, Spanish, and I ripped it all out. And this is it now, Canadian heaven. Okay, built in 1930. And before and after, we're almost there, Moses. Okay, we're almost at the end. Here we go. That's me with the duckies. I made up the name of an art critic from Aurelia named Trent Severn. And Trent loved my work. He said, "Just ducky." Okay, we're almost there. Here are new paintings. AGO paid $9 million for that. This 72 million pounds, Francis Bacon. Here's my portrait of Tim Horton, called Timbits. Okay, get it? $70 million, Lucian Freud. This is what Canadian artists are up against, okay? This is Peter Doig, trained in Eastern Ontario, sold in London for £9 million, okay? Okay, I can't get into this. There's, what's his name, Damien Hirst. Chinese paintings. That was a painting I did at age 22 of my family. My mother's bridge club. State of the tarts, the butter tarts. That's Mrs. Wilkie from Aurelia. And Margaret Atwood, the best butter tarts in town. I did a print for them for the bakery. And I'm looking at this building in Aurelia, 15,000 square feet. How much do you think they want for this? Parking for 6 cars, $399. And I'm going to open a gallery in the front and call it the Tart Gallery of Ontario. Okay, and here we go. We're done. There we are. I bought that at the junk store in Aurelia. I said to the lady, "How come it's only $20? And she said, without hesitating, "It doesn't have any arms." I said, "How about 10? She goes, 15. All right, okay. This is now hanging in the Windsor Arms, thank you very much, at the Prime Restaurant. All of these line images, the kids' books, which are outside. One of them has gone viral. It's in its 4th printing. There's Karen Kane with the moose, Moose Lake Pas de Deux. There's Karen looking at the painting. This was done for Lord Beaverbrook's 50th anniversary. They asked me to do a painting, and I've called it Leave It to Beaverbrook. Canadian heroes who should be in a portrait gallery, Norman Bethune, Tom Thompson, and this beautiful young kid killed in Afghanistan. These are my pop art images of Canada, the obscure Canadian historical events, the Diefenbakers and the Kennedys. Kill, conquer, rule, every country in the world. We should not be hypocritical. Look at this. Mackenzie King and the Queen Mother. The British did the exact same thing. Why don't we admit it? That's how come we are the way we are, for all the good and for all the ill. This was the show in Whistler. There is hope. Bonnie Brooks bought this painting. She's got it hanging in her loft, head of the bay. She says, I have to have it. There you go. This was done for Luminato in June. This was 2 weeks ago for Steve Nash's film Into the Wind. I had just done a series of paintings on Terry Fox this summer. It was a wonderful coincidence. And that's my story so far. Thank you all. I wish I hope I didn't go for too long. Did that bring back memories? Oh boy. I got another good 30 years left in me, so let's see what happens here. Just the beginning.
That's right. This way, Charlie.
Oh, okay.